știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și scut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Spre țări pe drum știut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. E pentru că pe lume partidul s-a dulci cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce-nseamnă ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. новостях в жизни важен первый шаг. Слышишь, веют над страною ветры яростных атак. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердцу тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди. Весть летит во все концы, вы поверьте нам, отцы. Будут новые победы, станут новые бойцы. Милости не жди, жизнь для правды не щади. Нам, ребята, в этой жизни только с правдой по пути. И вновь продолжает собой, и сердце тревожно в груди. И Ленин такой молодой, и юный октябрь впереди.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome along. It is the evening of the 17th of June, 2026, and here we are with a live stream where I'm going to be analyzing the US-Iran Memorandum of Understanding, so-called, and looking at what that actually means. And they're going to be going through a approximately hour-long presentation of the facts on that. So before we get to that, we'll do a few greetings, and I should urge you, as always, be sure to like and share this stream if you have not done so already. We are currently live on YouTube, X, Twitch, and Rumble. Certainly should be anyway. Let me have a look. Yes, we're all good. So yes, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll just do a few greetings first before we get into the meat of the issue. Anthony, you asked, did you ever do the stream on the charity industrial complex? No, I'd forgotten all about it, to be honest. I'll have to re-add it to my list. Hello to Mogman Dog, Bob from Australia, Albert, Peep Show 090, In It For Fun from Columbus, Ohio, Ogas Cybernetics from Idaho, Speedy Bozo from Sheffield, Andy from Oz, coming to us from Oz, Ekaterina Treskina, hello to you. Bruce Albert says, I have a question in relation to Trump's claim to have sunk the uranium navy. How do you rate his acumen in this area vis-a-vis Admiral Nelson at the Nile versus the fleet of the French? I haven't seen this comment from Trump, but Trump's brain is dribbling out of his ears as quick as Biden's ever was. So if he is claiming to have sunk, I surely sunk the uranium navy. I also sank the plutonium patrol, the napalm naval expeditionary force, and the TNT pedal boat, or something like that. Look, the man's brain has gone, his mind has gone. This very humiliating disaster that they incurred against Iran will only speed up either the end of his presidency or the effective end of his presidency. He's cooked. I'll get into this when we discuss the so-called memorandum of understanding. Look, shortcut, if you just want the too long don't read section of this live stream, look, whatever the Americans say they're going to agree to, it's not worth the paper it's written on. There you go. You can go home now. I'll get into all the reasons why in just a minute and what the Americans are aiming for with this. But Trump gambled and lost badly. And now he's committed the cardinal sin of making the Americans look weak and useless in front of their enemies. So he has to be disempowered. I predict that one of two things will happen. Either Trump himself will be forced out, he'll be allowed to just resign, an offer will be made to him, basically along these lines. Somebody from the Republican Party who has Trump's ear and can talk to him will go in and say, look, I'll do the American accent. Mr. President, everybody thinks that you've done a fantastic job making America great again. It is great out there. The stock market has never been bigger. It's never been better. It is a solid gold, absolute win of a country, Mr. President. And that's why, before things turn sour, it's better if you just take some more time on the golf course and don't actually bother to turn up to work anymore. And it'll be made obvious to Trump how badly things could go for him and his family if he sticks around. This is one way it could go. The corruption of the Trump family is gigantic. The Democrats could easily spend the next 2 years like raking over that if they get control of the House of Representatives. Not that the Democrats aren't corrupt, they just prefer their corruption in more covert ways. Campaign contributions, free lunches, prostitutes and cocaine, the usual ways. But Trump's naked corruption just opens the door to a lot of potential investigations that could also sink a lot of senior Republicans, or take them by association at least. So they would have an interest in cutting a deal with the Democrats, say, okay, right, hold off on the investigations, we'll get him to go. There'll be basically a conventional Republican business administration run by Vance for a couple of years, which will also firmly sink Vance's chances of ever being president. And then, President Patrick Bateman and Vice President AOCIA can take over in 2028 and try and rebrand this shitstorm. And that will be what will be presented to Trump will be, look, you go now, you can say that you've achieved the mission, America is great again, etc., and there'll be no investigations, or the investigations won't throw your son or either of your sons or your daughter or your son-in-law in jail if you agree to just go now and take your ill-gotten gains with you. Or he'll be disempowered by the Republican Party and the Democrats, who will essentially tell him, you either fire all the people in your administration who basically don't accord with our sensibilities, and basically you don't have any room for maneuver in the next 2 years at all. You just get to open things and that's it. One of those two things will happen, because he made there hasn't been this bad and obvious a defeat in quite some time. So I'll get into that in just a moment. Hello to Walter Stoltzing. Hello to In It for Fun says, parenting's the toughest job anyone will have in life. True. Congrats. Read to that child. Read, read, read. Indeed. I've started reading Irish fairy stories to her. She's 5 months old. I don't think she quite gets it yet, but she likes it when I do funny voices. Liverpool Photographs, hello to you. Wicked Witch of the Southeast, hello to you. And be sure to like and share and subscribe if you have not done so already. Yan says, what do you make of the reporting by Escobar and Johnson that Iran has a nuclear weapon? I would not take anything that Pepe Escobar says seriously. Well, Pepe Escobar is not a reporter of established facts at all. He's a drunk storyteller. What he does, I think, is hangs around various bars in Moscow and St. Petersburg and Beijing and Ulaanbaatar and various other points in between, talking to Iranian and Russian diplomats and Chinese diplomats who are also drunk, and reports the sort of slurred conversations as fact. Now, I don't know whether Iran has a nuclear weapon or not. Impossible for us to tell. It's certainly not beyond the realms of possibility, but Escobar's track record is terrible, quite frankly, and I wouldn't trust anything he says. I wouldn't trust much that Larry Johnson says either, given that I certainly wouldn't take it on faith, because that's a man with a lot of shady connections inside the American intelligence agencies. And if you wanted to reignite this war in the near future, what better way to do it than establishing that Iran had the bomb the whole time? Might be one of the excuses that they'd use, perhaps. We'll get into whether Iran can and indeed should have the bomb. My opinion on this is that, well, they could indeed develop the nuclear weapon, and there's no reason why they shouldn't have it. I mean, if fucking Israel can have one, why not? But there's a mistake being made by many in thinking that if you have a nuclear weapon, that somehow you won't get attacked and fucked over by the USA. That's not true. It's also not true that North Korea's nuclear weapons program is the reason that they don't get attacked by the USA. North Koreans do not get attacked by the US or the South Korean puppet regime, not because of the nuclear weapon question, but because the North Korean defense doctrine and the North Korean military can inflict an awful lot of damage on the United States very quickly, even without nuclear weapons. And actually taking them on would be a disaster for the US to do, because they have a society where every single man and quite a lot of the women are trained in arms, where everybody does military service, where everybody is ready to jump to and defend the country at a moment's notice. So the relationship between the government of the Korean Workers' Party and the masses, the relationship there appears to be strong. That's why they don't get attacked. The nuclear weapons, or the having of nuclear weapons, is just like the final piece of that puzzle, so to speak. Hello to James Graham. Hello to Jessica Fitz. Hello to Nemo Yederman. Hello to Abtin. Hello to Jenny, our moderator. Hello to Walter Keating. Spiral Alice. ACDT. ACDT enjoyed the latest Decline and Fall episode? Well, be sure to go and watch it if you haven't done so already. It's our analysis of the rise and fall of Titoism. Very interesting to research. I'm sure you'll find it interesting to watch. President Jesus says Trump decimated the Iranian Navy, which means a reduction of 10%. This is the one thing that he was truthful about. Yeah. Hello to Terry Eaton. Hello to who else we got here? Robeson. Hello to yeah. I think that's everybody. Yeah. Okay. So let's get into the meat of the issue here. Then I'm going to go through around about an hour-long discussion, an analysis of the memorandum of understanding here. So I'm just going to flip this. So this is on screen here. So you should there be able to see the presentation I'm going to walk through. So let's get to the first element, which is the comprador strategy. Now, so I'm going to go through this bit by bit and go through what the American imperialists are actually trying to achieve here with this so-called memorandum of understanding. That's assuming that it lasts for more than 5 minutes before falling apart. But certainly there is an old tactic that appears to be being pursued here. So on June 15th, that's 2 days ago, the Trump administration announced a memorandum of understanding that had been reached with the Islamic Republic of Iran to end the war that has raged since April. But to understand what this deal actually represents, we must go back much further, back to 2015 and back to the Obama administration, to a strategy that Trump himself jettisoned and destroyed in 2018, and that he is now, 8 years later, being forced to reconstruct from a position of profound weakness. So tonight we're going to demonstrate that what we're witnessing is not a peace born of strength on the US side, but the reconstruction of the failed comprador strategy of yesteryear. The attempt to cultivate an Iranian Gorbachev or Yeltsin through economic entanglement, elite integration, and the long-term subversion of the Islamic Republic of Iran from within. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, as it was called, was never merely a nuclear deal. It was one of the most sophisticated attempts by American imperialism to collapse the Iranian system through internal transformation rather than external assault. Trump's withdrawal from that in 2018 shattered that strategy. The current deal that's on the table is a desperate attempt to rebuild that strategy, but this time using the Gulf state proxies and from a weaker position and from a position of having far less leverage over Iran. But we will also demonstrate something that is more fundamental. We will show that the war that was supposed to break the Islamic Republic of Iran has instead in many ways strengthened it. Iran has emerged from 4 months of American bombardment with its military capacity intact, its strategic position enhanced, and its control over the global economy's most vital choke point proven beyond all doubt. The empire has not merely failed to achieve its objectives, it has created the conditions for their permanent frustration. So let us move on then to talk about the past. So we're going to start off by talking about the JCPOA, because this is directly relevant, as it seems to be that this is the direction that the US is now moving back in the direction of. So in 2015, the Obama administration signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, as it was called, which is referred to as the Iran nuclear deal. It was presented then and now as an arms control agreement, a limitation on uranium enrichment, a verification regime, and a diplomatic alternative to war. Now, the reality of it is that the JCPOA was, in fact, a comprador strategy, the most sophisticated that American imperialism has devised for Iran since the 1979 revolution. Its purpose was not merely to limit Iran's nuclear program. Its purpose was to cultivate comprador tendencies within the hierarchy of the Islamic Republic, to identify, integrate, and empower those elements within the Iranian elite who were amenable to economic and political subordination to the West. How was this to be achieved? Through the active integration of this elite into American systems, through the granting of visas to relatives of senior Iranian figures, through the creation of economic incentives that would bind Iranian elites to Western financial circuits, through the slow, patient construction of a network of dependency, personal, familial, and financial, that would over time produce an Iranian leadership class whose interests were not aligned with the Islamic Republic's anti-imperialist foundations, but with the requirements of global capital. You will remember that when the war began in April of 2026, a scandal erupted. It was revealed that there were a number of people related to senior figures in the Iranian system that were residents of the United States, working, studying, or living comfortably in the very country that their relatives officially denounced as the Great Satan. This was not an accident. It was not an oversight. This was the legacy of the JCPOA, the deliberate creation of human bridges between the Iranian elite and American society, designed to produce over time a class of Iranians whose personal fortunes were tied to the maintenance of positive relations with the US imperialist bloc. The Obama administration was seeking, in essence, an Iranian Gorbachev or Yeltsin, a leader who would emerge from within the existing system, who would speak the language of reform and openness, who would, in the name of democracy and freedom, dismantle the structures of the Islamic Republic and ultimately restore comprador rule. All of it, of course, will be presented as the natural evolution of history, the triumph of liberal values, the inevitable consequence of engagement. This was American imperialism's best chance to achieve in Iran what it had achieved in the Soviet Union: collapse through internal transformation, not through invasion, but through the slow corruption of the ruling group and the gradual substitution of national interests for personal and class interests, the replacement of revolutionary solidarity with individual bourgeois aspiration. And it was working to a degree, not quickly, not completely, but measurably. The Iranian economy was opening. Western investment was flowing in, cautiously, partially, but flowing. The Iranian middle class was growing, and with it, the social base for a more pro-Western orientation. The nuclear constraints were real, but they were secondary to this much larger project of social and economic engineering. We must understand this clearly. The JCPOA was not a gift to Iran. It was a long-term investment in Iranian elite capture, a patient, methodical project of creating the social and economic conditions for a future counter-revolution conducted under the banner of diplomacy and peace. It was, in the language of historical materialism, the superstructure of a specific economic base, the base of comprador integration of the gradual subordination of Iranian capital to the requirements of American-led global capital accumulation. Now we turn to the blunders of a certain Mr. D.J. Trump. So, in May of 2018, Trump withdrew the United States from the JCPOA. He reimposed sanctions. He launched what he called the maximum pressure campaign. He declared that the deal was the worst deal in history. Though he wasn't slurring so much back then, so it's the worst deal in history ever. A little bit more definitive. He argued that it had empowered Iran and it had threatened Israel, and thus he was going to get rid of it. Now, from the standpoint of immediate political calculation, the calculation regarding Trump, regarding the 2018 midterms, the calculation of pleasing the pro-Israel brigade, the calculation of satisfying the rabid militarist base of the Republican Party, this was understandable. From the standpoint of long-term imperial strategy, this was a catastrophe of historic proportions. Trump destroyed the very mechanism that American imperialism had constructed to achieve its greatest objectives in Iran, the internal transformation of the Islamic Republic and the cultivation of a counter-revolution. He shattered the economic incentives that were binding the Iranian elites to the West. He eliminated the visas and personal connections that were creating a comprador class. He drove the Iranian economy into crisis, and in doing so, he drove the Iranian political system towards revolutionaries, toward precisely those elements that were most resistant to integration into the US-led system. The result was predictable. The pro-Western comprador factions in Iran, those who had staked their political futures on the success of the JCPOA, they were discredited. The Revolutionary Guard, the revolution, and the other revolutionary elements in the system consolidated power. The nuclear program, far from being constrained, was retained, and the possibility of an Iranian Gorbachev receded into the distance. Trump had, in effect, burnt the bridge that Obama had built. And he had done so not because he had a better strategy, but because he could not see the strategy that existed. He saw the JCPOA as a concession to the enemy, rather than as a mechanism for subverting an enemy from within. He saw the economic opening as weakness, rather than as the most effective form of long-term control. This is the defining characteristic of Trump and his allies' approach to US foreign policy. And it is a characteristic that reveals the contradiction between Trump's petty bourgeois nationalist rhetoric and imperialist necessity. The rabid nationalist base wants the performance of toughness. They want to see a show, so to speak, whether it's on immigration or whether it's on Iran. They want to see their enemies destroyed, pulverized. We're going to break them. We're going to bomb them so much there's going to be nothing left. They want the appearance of dominance. But imperialism in its mature form requires more subtlety, it requires patience, it requires the long-term cultivation of dependency and the slow erosion of resistance. Trump could deliver an appearance, he could not deliver the substance. And in prioritizing appearance over substance, he destroyed the most effective instrument that the US imperialists had ever devised for the transformation of Iran. This is the blunder that now haunts him. The war that he began in April 2026, the bombing of Iranian military facilities, the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei and other senior leaders of the Islamic Republic, the oil price spike, these were all the direct consequences of a policy that had eliminated all alternatives to military confrontation. Having destroyed the comprador strategy, Trump left himself with only two options, surrender or war. And war, as we will now see, proved not only unsustainable, but actively led to at least a temporary retreat. Now, on February 28th this year, Trump launched the war, or I should say, renewed the war against Iran with a speech that promised total destruction. We're going to destroy the missiles raised in the streets of the ground, he declared. It'll be totally against blue. 4 months later, the United States is running around desperately trying to secure a peace deal. And the reason that it is negotiating is that it has completely failed to achieve the objectives that Trump set out. And not only failed, but comprehensively failed. So let's examine the military reality as revealed by recent reporting from the Financial Times and CNN, two very unimpeachable imperialist sources, that has emerged since the ceasefire. Now, for 40 days, US aircraft pounded the mountains around Yazd, one of Iran's most important military projects, a buried missile complex carved deep into the rock. The bombing was intense, the destruction appeared very great, and yet, according to the residents around the area, the Iranian missiles kept firing out of that complex regardless. US and Israeli forces kept bombing the mountains, said one Iranian witness, and Iran kept launching missiles until the final moments before the ceasefire. US intelligence assessments reported by CNN suggest that Iran retains roughly 70% of its mobile launchers and roughly 70% of its pre-war missile stockpile. They also indicate that Tehran has restored access to many of its missile sites, launchers and underground facilities, including positions along the Strait of Hormuz. The entrances to tunnels were bombed, but they were rapidly reopened. As one resident of Kermanshah province put it, often, only a few hours after a bombing, Iran would launch missiles from the same locations. We couldn't believe those facilities were surviving such intense attacks. The so-called regime insider, whoever that might be, was quoted by the Financial Times saying, "More than ever before, we have concluded that building trust is a meaningless strategy. Only strength can serve as a deterrent, not argument in international forums about our rights. The enemy must be convinced of our capabilities and must never be allowed to miscalculate again." And the Revolutionary Guard, of course, has emerged from this war strengthened, not weakened. As the same so-called regime insider noted in the Financial Times, today the Guards are stronger than they were before the war. Their standing within the system has risen dramatically because they fought under extraordinary pressure and continued launching missiles until the final moment. This is the military reality that the peace deal obscures. The United States spent 4 months bombing Iran. It spent billions of dollars on munitions. It risked escalation with other major powers. And its principal achievement was to prove that the Iranian system of deterrence works, that the underground missile cities can survive sustained aerial bombardment, and that the asymmetric strategy of preserving arsenals for later rounds of conflict is viable, and that the Revolutionary Guard is the most reliable guarantor of Iranian security. Now, the rapid turnaround on cleaning up the missile bases during the war was observed to be very impressive, even by US intelligence. The survivability aspect is not merely technical, it is strategic. It means that Iran can absorb a great deal of punishment, maintain capability, and return to the fight. And it means that any future American administration that contemplates military action against Iran must reckon with the demonstrated fact that bombing does not destroy Iranian military capacity. That is why the war ended, not because the United States won, but because the United States discovered that it could not win under the current balance of forces, that the costs of continuing exceeded the benefits, and that the costs of escalation were politically and economically intolerable, as we have frequently argued on this program. So the Memorandum of Understanding, I'm just going to move the presentation on there. Sorry, fell behind there. So the Memorandum of Understanding of June of this year is, in its essentials, an attempt to reconstruct the old comprador strategy that Trump ditched in 2018, but to do so from a much weaker position and through mechanisms that are cruder, much more transparent, and less effective. Now, the immediate provisions are familiar. The reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, the waiver of oil sanctions on Iran, the release of frozen Iranian assets, the promise of reconstruction funds. But these are not ends in themselves. They're a means to an end. The end of trying to cultivate, once again, reliable comprador partners within the Iranian hierarchy. Consider the financial architecture. Trump has insisted that the United States will not directly invest in Iran. That is technically correct, but the $300 billion reconstruction program, with the regional partners mechanism, so-called, is designed to achieve precisely what direct US investment would have achieved under the JCPOA. Again, the binding of Iranian elites into long-lasting economic arrangements with the Gulf states. And here we must introduce a crucial piece of information that has emerged since in the more recent hours. According to Reuters, who reported on this on June the 16th, the $300 billion fund is not merely a proposal. More than half of it is already committed. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, have already pledged their contributions. This is not a future possibility, it is a present reality. The money is moving. The economic entanglement is apparently already underway. The role of the Gulf states here is not incidental, it is structural. We should remember that in 2024, these same Gulf states, the Saudis, the UAE, Qataris, played an absolutely crucial role in securing defections at the senior level from the Assad government in Syria. The economic incentives, the personal guarantees, the quiet diplomacy, all of it was channeled through Gulf capital, which could operate with a flexibility and a cultural proximity that direct American intervention could not match. The same model is now being applied to Iran. Vast amounts of capital controlled by the Saudis and the Gulf states, sovereign wealth funds, petrodollar reserves, investment vehicles, are apparently going to be funneled into Iran, not as charity, not as development aid, but as binding mechanisms, long-term contracts, joint ventures, infrastructure projects that will create Iranian stakeholders in the Gulf economic order and Gulf stakeholders in Iranian stability. The hope of the people that put this together, whether Trump fully understands this or not, is that this economic entanglement will produce over time the same effect that the JCPOA was designed to produce: the greater corruption of the Iranian ruling class, the substitution of personal interest for national interest, and the gradual emergence of an Iranian leadership group that sees its future not in the anti-imperialist traditions of 1917, but in the integration into the US-led global capitalist order. But there is a crucial difference. Under the JCPOA, this process was supposed to be gradual and subtle and mediated through direct American institutions. Under the 2026 deal, it is rapid, transparent, and mediated through Gulf proxies. The subtlety is gone, the patience is gone, the long-term institutional embedding is gone. What remains is a blunt instrument in the form of money, lots of money, thrown at Iran in the hope that someone will catch it and be bought. So, let's have a look at the covert architecture here. Now, the public architecture of the 2026 deal, the memorandum of understanding, the Hormuz reopening, the oil sanctions waivers, etc., is only one layer of the strategy. Beneath it lies a covert architecture that is in some respects more important than the public provisions. On June the 15th, Israel Hayom reported that Trump had secretly approved a Qatar-Iran cash deal even before the public announcement of the Memorandum of Understanding. This is not a detail, it is a revelation. It tells us that the financial architecture of the deal operates on at least two levels: the public level of negotiated agreements and signed documents, and the private level of direct cash transfers, personal guarantees, and immediate financial incentives to specific Iranian actors. What does this covert architecture accomplish that the public architecture cannot? First, it provides immediate gratification where the public process provides only promises. The reconstruction fund is a long-term project. The oil sanctions waivers are a general economic measure, but the Qatar cash deal is direct, personal, and immediate. It goes to specific individuals, specific families, specific factions within the Iranian system. It creates immediate stakeholders in the success of the deal, stakeholders who have a personal financial interest in ensuring that negotiations proceed, that the tensions de-escalate, that the economic opening continues. Second, it operates outside the public scrutiny that makes the Comprador strategy visible and therefore vulnerable. The $300 billion figure is headline news. It is discussed in Parliament, debated in the media, criticized by various reactionaries. But the Qatar cash deal is secret. It is known only to those who receive it and those who authorize it. It creates dependencies that cannot be publicly identified and therefore cannot be publicly resisted. Third, it leverages the specific cultural and financial networks that the Gulf states possess and the United States does not. Qatar has long-standing commercial relationships with Iran. It shares a gas field with them in the Persian Gulf. It has mediated between Iran and the West before. It can move money through channels that are invisible to American financial surveillance. It can offer guarantees that are credible because they are backed by the personal word of the Qatari royals, not by the impersonal machinery of the US Treasury. This is the privatization of imperial diplomacy, the transfer of functions that were once performed by the American state to private actors, to Gulf sovereigns, to personal networks. It is a sign of American weakness, not strength. A hegemon that can achieve its objectives through its own institutions does not need to subcontract to Qatar. It does not need to operate through covert cash deals. It does not need to hide its financial architecture from public view. The very secrecy of the Qatar deal is an admission of incapacity, an admission that the American state cannot, by its own means, achieve the elite capture that the Comprador strategy requires. And yet, even this covert architecture is unlikely to succeed. The Iranian elite have been watching the Assad model. They have seen how Gulf capital was used to secure defections in Syria. They have seen how economic incentives were deployed to break the loyalty of senior officials. And they have seen and drawn appropriate conclusions. The Iranian system is not the Syrian system. It is older, more institutionalized, more ideologically coherent, and more deeply rooted in a revolutionary narrative that makes Comprador integration politically toxic. The cash might buy some individuals It may be by some factions, but it is unlikely to purchase the whole system. Now, if you'll just excuse me for 1 minute, I need to urgently grab some more water. So talk amongst yourselves for 5 minutes. Okay, and we're back again. So let's get going on the next part of this. So here we're going to talk about the hybrid war, and the hybrid war that's been going for 47 years. So it's essential to understand that the end of one phase of a hybrid war means really just the opening up of another one. Since 1979, successive US administrations, doesn't matter which party, Democrat or Republican, Carter and Reagan, Bush and Clinton, Obama and Trump, Biden and Trump, again, have waged the same hybrid war against the Islamic Republic. A war of economic sabotage and cyber warfare, a war of covert operations and proxy militia, a war of sanctions and propaganda and the endless cultivation of internal opposition. The war has never stopped. It has merely changed form over and over again. The 2026 deal represents a shift in method, not a shift in objective. The direct military assault, the bombing of nuclear facilities, the naval blockade, and the threat of invasion has had to be wound down because it proved counterproductive. It united the Iranian population against the US imperialists. It drove up oil prices to politically dangerous levels. It exposed the limits of American military power against a determined and geographically advantaged adversary. But the hybrid war continues. It continues through the economic incentives that are designed to corrupt. It continues through the Gulf state investments that are designed to create dependency. It continues through the reconstruction funds that will flow to specific regions, specific companies, and specific individuals, carefully chosen, carefully monitored, carefully directed toward those who demonstrate the appropriate political orientation. And it continues through the intelligence networks that have never been dismantled, the CIA stations in the Gulf that still operate, the Israeli Mossad operations, the British MI6 connections. All of them are still active. All of them are still seeking the Iranian Gorbachev, the Iranian Yeltsin, the figure who will emerge from within the system to declare that the revolution is over and that the future lies with the West, that Iran must rejoin the community of nations on Western terms. We should also note that the specific mechanism of the hybrid war, as it will operate under the 2026 deal, the relief for performance principle described by the recent Axios report, is not merely a diplomatic framework. It is a mechanism for continuous pressure. The United States will wind down its naval blockade in proportion with Iran restoring traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran performs, the relief follows. If Iran falters, the relief is withheld. This creates, so the American imperialists hope, a permanent state of conditional dependency, a state in which the Iranian economic recovery is always contingent on American approval, always subject to American leverage, and always vulnerable to American reversal. The direct war has had to be paused. The hybrid war continues, and the objective remains the same: the collapse of the Islamic Republic and the restoration of comprador rule, not through invasion, but through internal transformation, not through force, but through corruption of those who hold power. So, we now turn to look at Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz, as permanent leverage. Now, the most significant development of this war, the development that transforms the entire strategic calculus of the Middle East, is not the peace deal. It is the demonstrated fact that the Iranians can shut down the Strait of Hormuz at will. US intelligence assessments that were reported by CNN on June 16th confirm this in the most explicit terms. As one source familiar with the assessments put it, we have now handed Iran de facto control over the strait. Iran already had that, by the way, a weapon more powerful than any nuke. This is not hyperbole, it is the structural reality that the war has produced. The Trump administration miscalculated. It believed that Iran would not close the strait because doing so would hurt Iran more than the US. It believed that the Chinese would use their influence to prevent a closure. That was based on absolute wishful thinking and nothing else. It prioritized strikes against Iranian military targets rather than dedicating assets to deterring the closure of the straits. And the American imperialists were proved to be wrong on every count. As one source involved with the military planning told CNN, quote, losing control of the strait will be the biggest blunder of this era because it is a card the US cannot counter without going all in. Now there is no way to undo the strait without amassing a massive force. And by the way, amassing a massive force is one thing they absolutely cannot do at this stage. The Iranians understood very clearly the limitations of the power of the American imperialists. They knew very well, they understood that the US couldn't assemble a force that could actually seriously assault Iran. All the talk about seizing Karg Island or doing some kind of landing on some other island in the Strait of Hormuz, or some Iranian port town or city close by to it, and then using that as a point of further assault, all of that was nonsense. The Americans just don't have the men to do it. And their footprint in the region had been severely reduced by the successful Iranian bombing campaign of their bases. So all of this was hot air, and the Iranians knew it. So the Iranians now have positional power in the most absolute form. Iran does not need to match the US Navy ship for ship. It does not need aircraft carriers or nuclear submarines. It needs only the demonstrated capability to interrupt the flow of oil through a channel that is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, a channel through which approximately 1/5 of global oil shipments pass. And it is now proven beyond any doubt that it can do so. But the leverage over the straits is not the only leverage Iran has acquired. The CNN report revealed a second equally significant development. Iran has been plotting an economic nuclear option if the negotiations with the US failed. This involved getting the Yemenis, Ansar Allah, to close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which connects the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. This is another global trade choke point, and its closure would compound the economic disruption of a Hormuz closure. This is why the Ansar Allah held off, because that was another escalation point that the Iranians wanted to hold in reserve. if the Americans, imperialists, did not back off, then the Bab el Mandeb Strait gets closed and disaster follows. And another source, quoted in the CNN report, said, quote, shutting Bab el Mandeb down, combined with shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, would completely blow up the golden economy. The Iranians have held back from this step so far because they know it could derail the peace talks, but it remains a card they can play if the deal falls apart. Now, this is the new geometry of power in West Asia. It is not the geometry of military superiority, which the United States likes to think it still possesses in terms of absolute numbers of aircraft, naval assets, etc., etc. It is the geometry of structural interruption, the ability to inflict disproportionate economic damage through limited military means. It is the geometry that Samir Amin described in his analysis of dependency. The power of the peripheral nation is not the power to defeat the imperial core, but the power to disrupt the system upon which the imperial core depends. And this geometry is permanent. The CNN reports note that US intelligence agencies have been continuously reassessing how the Iranians might use this lever in the future. While there is not currently a consensus, multiple sources said Iran has been emboldened by the fact that it was able to both close the strait and target Gulf energy infrastructure without expending significant capabilities. Some US officials say Iran is now more likely to take this step in the future because it has proven that the consequences are manageable and the leverage is immense. This is the strategic legacy of the 2026 war. Not an American victory, but an empowerment of Iran, not the elimination of the Islamic Republic, but its transformation into a structural feature of the global economy. The United States has spent 4 months and billions upon billions of dollars to prove that its most powerful adversary in West Asia can control the flow of the world's oil, and there is nothing the US can do about it without amassing forces which are politically and economically impossible to assemble and even more impossible to maintain. Now, here we look at why the new strategy will ultimately fail. There is a reason to believe that this reconstructed comprador strategy will fail, but it will fail more comprehensively than the JCPOA failed, and for reasons that are structural rather than contingent. The first reason is timing. The JCPOA was negotiated over years with careful attention paid to institutional embedding, with gradual sequencing of incentives with the patience that long-term subversion requires. The 2026 deal is compressed into 60 days. It is a rush job born of crisis and desperation, driven by the immediate need to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and stabilize global oil prices. There is no time for the slow cultivation of dependency. There is only time for the blunt application of cash. And cash applied too quickly and too transparently produces resentment as often as it produces compliance. The second reason is transparency. The JCPOA was presented as a technical nuclear agreement, complex, boring, the domain of experts. The economic integration that accompanied it was discreet, gradual, and largely invisible to the Iranian public at first. The 2026 deal, by contrast, is a public spectacle. The $300 billion figure is headline news. The Gulf state involvement is openly discussed. The comprador logic is visible to anyone with eyes to see it. And in Iran, where there are still memories of the 1953 coup and the subsequently brutal regime of the Shah, memories that are still vivid, where the memory of Western exploitation is foundational to the revolutionary narrative, this visibility is politically toxic. The third reason is the changed balance of forces within Iran. In 2015, the so-called moderates, the comprador faction, were as ascendant. They had won elections, they controlled key ministries, they were positioned to benefit from economic opening and steer it in directions that served their interests. In 2026, after 8 years of the maximum pressure campaign and the discrediting of the so-called reformists, after the consolidation of power by revolutionaries during the war, and the mass mobilization of the Iranian population behind a much tougher line to be taken with the imperialists, the landscape now is fundamentally different. The factions most amenable to Western integration have become weaker. Witness, of course, the almost complete irrelevance of President Pezeshkian. The Iranian population is much more determined to see the end of the threats to their country through to the end, no matter what it takes. And many millions of Iranians, again, who had an ambivalent relationship with the Islamic Republic, now have rallied to its defense. And there is the pre-existing class conflicts in Iran between, of course, labor and capital, but also between the Iranian working class and the capitalist elements who actually want a reopening with the West. The Iranian working class, as certain Iranian internal observers have noted, was, of course, engaged in a conflict with the government before January of this year. But a lot of Iranian unions called off their strikes when it became obvious they were being used by the US imperialists to try and undermine the government. But the struggle inside Iran itself, as it will only intensify. The pro-Western lot have been very much weakened by the war and by the way that the US imperialists have basically kicked them in the face every time they've groveled before them. So the most decisive factor, though, that the Iranian anti-imperialists and revolutionaries have been emboldened by is the military success. They have, over the last 4 months, proven that they can withstand whatever the American imperialists can throw at them. They have proven that they can close the Strait of Hormuz. They have proven that they can strike the Gulf states and their energy infrastructure. They've proven that they can strike anywhere inside occupied Palestine. This they ended up achieving the opposite of what Trump wanted. The war was supposed to break Iran, but instead reinforce the position of those who are most resistant to Western integration. The fourth reason is the Gulf states themselves. The Saudis, the UAE, these are not neutral instruments of American policy. They, of course, have had a long-term relationship with the United States and before them the British. But they do have their own interests, their own rivalries, and their own ambitions. They are happy to invest in Iran if the investment serves their regional position. But they are equally happy to destabilize Iran if destabilization serves their interests better. The attempt to use Gulf capital as a proxy for American influence introduces a layer of unpredictability that the JCPOA, with its direct US-Iranian channels, did not have. And the fifth reason, most fundamental, is the structural crisis of American imperialism itself. In 2015, the United States was still seen as the undisputed hegemon of the world system. It could still offer integration into the global economy as a reward because it controlled that economy. In 2026, the US is a hegemon in relative decline, facing peer competitors, struggling with domestic contradictions, and increasingly unable to deliver on any of its promises. The Iranian government can see this. They can see that the American guarantee is less reliable than ever, that the American market is less central than it was, that the American-led future is far less attractive than it was. The bribes have lost their value because the one paying them has lost his power. And there is a sixth reason which we must not neglect. As I mentioned earlier, the Iranian population itself. The comprador strategy depends not merely on elite capture, but on the creation of a social base that supports imperialism or supports integration into imperialism. The Iranian middle class of 2015 was very much open to Western entanglements. The Iranian population of 2026, after 8 years of economic warfare, 4 months of intense bombing, and the demonstration that the West's promises are worthless and its threats are survivable, that population is far less amenable. The Iranian nationalism has been radically reinforced, as has anti-imperialist solidarity, and the revolutionary narrative has been validated, not discredited. The social base for comprador rule, therefore, has shrunk, not grown. So, final point here. What we're witnessing, then, is not merely a diplomatic episode. It is a chapter in the long arc of imperialist crisis. the crisis of American hegemony, the crisis of the world system that it has dominated for 80 years, and the crisis of the strategies that it has employed to maintain that dominance. The JCPOA represented the most sophisticated version of this strategy. Trump destroyed it and was not able to put anything in its place. He now frantically turns back to this strategy in the hope of re-establishing some kind of ability to actually affect things inside Iran itself. So this is a product of a country in the form of Iran that was essentially able to call the Americans bluff. They were able to call the Americans bluff because essentially they worked out the weaknesses of the American political, economic, and military system. Excuse me. They worked out that the American reliance on projection of power via aircraft carrier was hideously out of date. They worked out that the American bases that surround Iran, whilst significant in terms of their ability to run like special operations, could easily be overwhelmed by Iranian missile and drone fire. In fact, before coming on the air tonight, I saw an interview with the Iranian pilots who had bombed American bases in Kuwait. They flew what was a genuinely sort of Top Gun type mission through Kuwaiti airspace, flying at some points a mere 50 feet above the ground to avoid radar and Patriot missile interceptors. Successfully bombed the hell out of an American base and then returned home, aided either advertently or inadvertently by Kuwaiti air defense systems, which promptly shot down the American planes that gave chase to the Iranian aging F-5 fighter jets. So the Iranians worked out, they made a study of the US way of war, which is what you would expect a serious military to do. And the Iranians have a serious military. They have serious military leaders who looked at the American way of war over the last 25 years to 30 years and worked out that the Americans couldn't mobilize the number of men they would need to actually carry through a regime change operation. They would need 1 million men. The Americans don't have those. They couldn't mobilize them. They certainly couldn't train them in time, and arguably they couldn't supply them, never mind resupply them. And politically, the American government doesn't have the ability or the willingness to do such a mobilization. So they knew the weaknesses of their enemy. They assessed their weaknesses and exploited them. Now, does this mean that we are now in for a long period of peace? Well, there is another variable which I didn't mention in that analysis of the document itself, and that is Lebanon. That is the actions of the Israeli regime, and that is something which is still to be decided, because in Lebanon you've got several different struggles going on at once. You have the repeated attempts by the Zionists to expand into the south of Lebanon again and get back what they lost in the year 2000. You also have the struggle against them of Hezbollah in a war of national defense. But you also have the struggle in Lebanon itself. This struggle between the Lebanese patriotic forces and the Lebanese comprador regime, represented by the presidency of Joseph Aoun. And that struggle will have to be played out, because that struggle is absolutely crucial as to how the in Lebanon is going to work out. As I've said before, Netanyahu shouldn't be seen as just representing himself. He represents the most openly militaristic and fascistic sections in the American ruling class. They will not be happy about this deal. And indeed, they're screaming about it already, that it betrays American weakness. They will want to derail it. They will want to make sure it doesn't go through. Netanyahu is their tool to do that. He will commit Israeli forces to inflame things further by launching further attacks on Lebanon and engaging again with Hezbollah. Though Trump was trying to recruit al-Shara or al-Jilani or whoever the hell he is into taking on Hezbollah, but I don't think that will actually happen. Principally because I don't think the Turks are particularly into that. They don't fancy the idea of their puppet regime being sacrificed in a bloody war against Hezbollah, which, of course, al-Sharaa is by no means guaranteed to win. In fact, pretty much the opposite. I would say that the HTS lot are good at murdering civilians and driving around in pickup trucks. Fighting Hezbollah, though, they're a lot less keen on. So Trump's not going to get his own way on that one. But there will be attempts to derail this. However, what I would say is that the Americans, American imperial planners, will now revert to more subtle tactics of subversion and terrorism to try and get their way in Iran. But the bigger, or I should say, that the struggle which is as important is the struggle within Iran itself, the struggle between patriotic forces and comprador elements, the struggle between those who still wish to find some way back into the good graces of the imperialists and those who want to decisively turn their back on the imperialists and move in the direction of more comprehensive links with the Chinese, perhaps. That struggle itself will need to be watched as to how it plays out. Though what I will conclude with is that this deal might end this round of hostilities. But of course, American imperialism cannot help but seek to try and destroy Iran. They absolutely are in. The US imperialist bloc is in a crisis which is amplified by their inability to defeat the Russians, their inability to defeat Iran, their inability to take on China. Their credibility is draining away, meaning that they will be under pressure themselves to do something about Iran very quickly. This again will not work, but they will keep trying. They have no alternative. And that is the thing we have to bear in mind. No matter what is said in this agreement, no matter what is said about how long it's going to last, the aggression will return, and the aggression will return because the US imperialist system is in itself in a very severe crisis that requires ever greater levels of aggression against its enemies and against all of those who resist it. But this deal, though I would be very suspicious of it were I Iranian, even with all the caveats, the deal itself represents a defeat of American imperialism. They thought that they would be raising the flag in Tehran within a month. Instead, they were revealed as being far weaker than they would like to have been, and revealed to be unable to defeat a determined Iran. And so that's the main message to take away from this. U.S. imperialism lost this war. And its president may end up paying the price for that. So, let's just pause here. I'll be back in just a moment to handle more of your questions. Bear with me. Right, okay, so hello to Svetlana Simonoska in Sydney. Hello to Lilith3953, says Irish fairy stories are great. If you find Patricia Lynch, she's brilliant. I'll make a note of the name. Hello to Sligo Comrade. Hello to Luke Baker. Hello to Poi Ice Panic, who says Iranian students and professionals leaving the West and flying to Iran to participate in defense is something unprecedented in modern history. Yeah, they even had large numbers of Iranians who've been living in the West for a long time returning home again, which again that's unprecedented. That's not something that we've seen for a long time. So yeah, certainly something worth noting. In It for Fun says, don't do the drug-addled narcoleptic Trump voice to your daughter. You'll traumatize her. Well, she doesn't like it when I do impressions, certain impressions anyway. She gets quite confused and perturbed. So no narcoleptic Trump voice to the baby. I'll just save it for the show. You gotta remember. Yeah, you seen that? Trump's been falling asleep an awful lot recently. Ogas Cybernetics says knew a lot of Iranians at college, smart guys, but they were all about capitulation to the US. Probably why they were in Utah. I hope they were unharmed and their eyes opened. Well, if the US bombing the shit out of your country doesn't open your eyes, there's no hope for you. And by no hope, I refer, of course, to the Iranian Pahlavists, who I saw a whole group of this the weekend just gone. I was back in Manchester for a conference, and there were around about 200 people gathered outside Manchester Central Library, um, with some local Pahlavists addressing them from a massive PA system. See, about 2 years ago, when the Pahlavists started turning up in the square outside the Central Library in Manchester, there was about 10 of them there. So they've recruited more over the last couple of years, and they have drawn with them, of course, the usual complement of crazed Zionists and British fascists who support them. So there was a couple of hundred Pahlavists, most of whom seem to be very petty bourgeoisie type or a sort of above, very, very rich looking bunch with a bunch of like middle class Zionists tagged onto them and some crazy British fascist guys wandering around with giant crucifixes. A rather unlikely, or perhaps rather too likely combination. But they were all screaming, and I do mean screaming. They were screaming for hours and hours that Trump needed to start bombing Iran again. And that revealed a very interesting thing about these Iranian exiles. And I've met quite a few Iranian exiles over the years. I've met some like Marxist exiles who, of course, were no fans of the Islamic Republic, but had a more interesting and, so we say, subtle take on things. But the monarchists, these all seem to be like, I'm going to be blunt about it, bourgeois scum, basically. These seem to be like the sons and daughters of like some Shah-linked property owner from 47 years ago who probably looks at Iran now and thinks it's run by like horrendous proles and peasants who have cheated him of his birthright. And so they go out every Saturday to Manchester and they wave gigantic monarchist flags and they scream for the Americans to rain death and destruction down upon Iran. These people are depraved, to be quite blunt about it. But it's a class thing, and it's a class consciousness thing. For the bourgeoisie and the petty bourgeois who lose out during a revolution, for them, they are the nation. Whether it's Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, the Soviet Union back in the day, anywhere, to them, like their property and their entire way of life based on their ability to profit from that property, their ability to exploit the labor of the peasants and workers, their ability to rule a country. Well, if they don't have the ability to exploit and profit, and if they don't have the ability to rule that country anymore, for many of them, they don't want that country even to exist anymore, especially the exiles. The exiles who have been in the US or Britain for decades and decades, who effectively are British and effectively are American, they just want that country to burn. They want Iran to burn. They want Cuba to burn because they can never, ever, ever, ever get over the fact that they were the property owners and then one day they weren't anymore. And this is why, like, you can't deal with the people like that, the Palavist types, the MEK types, the bourgeois types, the exiled Cubans, the scum. Quite frankly, there's no point sugarcoating it. There are other exiles who are exiled from Iran for much more noble reasons, who fell foul of like the purges of like Rafsanjani back in the late 80s. But for the monarchist types, you can dismiss those as just the scum of the earth. Uh, This basically sounds like a planned operation to put Trita Parsi in power. I really don't think old Trita Parsi would be up for the job, but I can see Sam Cedar getting very excited about that. Hello to Ash, who's made it to the stream. In It for Fun says, what's your read on Gabriel Rockhill's Who Paid the Pipers of Western Marxism? Very interesting book. Go and check out our interview with Gabriel Rockhill that me and Kit Clarenberg did over on the Decline and Fall channel for our conversation with him. Hello to Alan Smith in Georgia. Hello to Sophia. Hello to Sid Hatfield. Hello to Aziz, etc. Okay, so going to be bringing things to a close for tonight. I'll be back with you tomorrow at the same time, 11, or possibly a little bit earlier, possibly at 10. Because I did have two things on the agenda for tonight that I wanted to talk about. One of which was the Iran so-called peace deal. The other one of which is the sort of a renewed round of anti-Russian sort of militarist hysteria that has broken out in perfidious Albion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about that tomorrow night. It's linked to the resignation of the disgusting gnome-like creature, John Healey, as Secretary of Defense, and the upcoming Labour leadership battle. So a lot of things to talk about. Come back for that tomorrow night when I'll be going through that. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in tonight. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. I will be doing another Patreon Q&A later this week on Saturday, dealing with philosophical questions. So join Patreon for that if you want details of that. Also, going to be finally getting round to completing our series on Syria very soon, so keep an eye open for that one. But until tomorrow, thank you for tuning in. I'll throw you back to a video outro, if you'll just bear with me for 1 minute, returning to a very old hit, shall we say.
البته آمریکایی‌ها اونهایی که با سیاست‌های این منطقه آشنا هستن میدانند که ورود آمریکا در این قضیه 100% به ضرر اوست. اونچه که او در این زمینه ضربه خواهد خورد به مراتب بیشتر است از اونچه که ایران ممکنه صدمه بخوره.
که تا آخرین نفس راحت را ادامه خواهیم داد ای شهید. آخرین نفس راحت را ادامه خواهیم داد ای شهید.